Working 9 to 5.
Flexible work hours. We all want them, right? Well, hang on. Hello, I'm Richard Adey, and this is Best Practice. Stepping outside of the traditional 9 to 5 Monday to Friday schedule isn't for everyone. It won't work in every job or every industry. But for those who take up flexible working hours, it can help balance work and the rest of life. So are there pitfalls to an alternative work schedule, such as the 4-10 compressed week, which is 4 10-hour days? Well, Ed Hyatt and Erica Kosler looked at a firm in the US that put a third of its workforce on exactly that schedule. Ed's a PhD student, Erica's a lecturer in management. Both are at the University of Melbourne, and they're with me now. Erica, let's start with how common flexible work is.
Actually, in the broader range of flexible working practices, which might also include working at home or working remote, quite a few number of workplaces, particularly government agencies, do have some form of flexible working on the books.
Is it something that workers generally think about positively?
When we say flexible working and we hear that word, we generally think that is something that's going to be chosen by the employee, that it means that I have the choice to flex my time to maybe go early to meet a friend, or work late so that I can leave early on Friday, or set up my time perhaps so that we can arrange the kids' pick up and drop off. So the assumption tends to be, and this is where the kind of positive feeling tends to be, that it's the worker that's choosing things.
Right. And to the opposite of that, what we were looking at in particular was what happens when the employer actually mandates a schedule. So taking a third of their workforce from a regular traditional 9 to 5 schedule and putting them on this compressed work week, what was that like? How was that received by people? And did they receive the benefits that they were expecting to? There's probably a set of concerns about flexible work arrangements, both from an organizational perspective and an individual perspective. And from the individual's perspective, we found that fatigue was becoming quite an issue for some folks. Longer work days necessitated longer breaks, additional breaks, more errors towards the end of the day. That's a very common theme in the literature related to fatigue issues. What else we looked at was there were also coordination issues with other staff that were no longer on that 410 program. So in the case of the organization we looked at, 1/3 of their workforce had been put on this 410 schedule, but 2/3 of them still remained on whatever schedule they had had before. So there was a number of cases where there were coordination issues between the offices in the company, because some people were just not at work on Fridays. So it necessitated a real reshuffling of the duties for everybody in the organization, even though only 1/3 technically were directly impacted.
What are, I suppose, the benefits for management or perhaps the organisation more widely of having their workforce, perhaps part of it, perhaps all of it, on compressed work hours?
Well, specifically in the case that we looked at, one of the reasons why they'd implemented it in the first place was to save money on the utilities. So they were looking at saving money by closing down a lot of their buildings. There were probably about 40 or 50 buildings, individual standing sites, that were affected by this. So ostensibly, they should have saved quite a lot on utilities because they shut down all the heating, the cooling, the lighting, et cetera, on Fridays because they only had people in there Monday through Thursday. That didn't necessarily pan out quite as much. Another possible benefit is that it might serve your customers better. So Eric and I were talking about this walking in this morning, is that in the case we looked at here in particular, the contractors were really quite happy to come in after normal working hours of what you would have considered a normal working hour, Monday through Thursday. It fit their schedule great to come in and deal with permits, et cetera, with the government agencies that they were dealing with. And they did not mind not having Friday as an option anymore to come in. So it really served those customers quite well.
And to make that more general, there are certain types of jobs where you really don't want somebody to clock off. You don't want your surgeon after 10 hours to say, okay, that's a day for me. Somebody else can finish. And similarly, apparently, police cases, that might be better to have that longer duration. So perhaps the nature of certain types of jobs is more amenable to compressing the time like that.
Are there, I suppose, lessons for how to do this well so that there's a good outcome and that the workforce is generally happier with the result and management's generally happier?
I think if this is an employee-chosen flexible working plan, that I, as the employee, am talking to my manager about flexing my time, I think for that to happen well, there really has to be one thing, and that thing is trust. So that's usually going to come along with a healthy culture in the workplace, good management practices, good HR, and that your manager is going to be able to trust you. We actually had somebody write into us when our article came out. This is a government worker who had compressed her time in order to provide additional family care duties, and noted that even though their department fully supported the flexible working practices, and other units had had that happen quite well, maybe her manager wasn't quite so familiar with this. And so if you can imagine, people were actually checking up that she was there later in the afternoon and at her desk. So that's not the best management practice. So that would be the requirement, kind of a good set of practices and performance metrics for the employee chosen flexibility. And then for the employer choosing those compressed work weeks, choosing those compressed hours, probably doing that job analysis and the customer analysis to think about what are the benefits, but also the possible disadvantages of flexing the time of employees and compressing or changing up the schedule.
I want to explore further the first issue you raised, Erica, because there's a huge difference between what the policy is and what the culture then allows, because this could become contingent. You might work your 40 hours, and towards the end of your fourth day, you just check in with your manager. I won't be here tomorrow. And she says, well, hang on, we've got that thing that's only just come up today. And you can imagine those sorts of conversations happening a lot.
Oh, I can certainly imagine those conversations. That's exactly the type of thing that people have brought to my attention. One example is somebody who is ostensibly on a 4-day work week and not working Fridays. And that is exactly, the big boss comes in and says, oh, yeah, surprise, we're going to have lunch tomorrow. And that keeps happening. It's not like a occasional occurrence. It's like this becomes the norm. So crowding in on the employee time can be a real problem if other people aren't mindful, I think, of that strategy.
The other thing, Ed, is that, and I'm certain, I think many of us are guilty of this now, is that the trouble with work is that, and with technology, is that it's very easy to kind of just pick up your phone at home and answer that email. And if you're really not supposed to be working for 3 days, that's an extra day in which you're not supposed to do it. You can easily imagine people doing it and even coming under pressure to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the issues of dealing with the boundaries that exist between work and home become even more complicated when you're dealing with technology. And then, again, as you mentioned, even if it's a policy that you're not supposed to be working, are you really not going to answer that urgent email on your day off? It becomes more of a decision point for individuals. And again, you got to work in partnership with the management as well. Management ostensibly should be acknowledging and respecting the policy that they had set out and that you had set up, in agreement with the employee. The employee should probably be mindful that they don't have to, go beyond those boundaries that they had established, et cetera. It's going to be a bit of push and pull on both parties.
Erica, how are women affected by flexible hours and, I suppose, how they are able to get ahead at work?
Well, indeed, and that's one of the concerns. So statistically, women are somewhat more likely to request a flexible working plan, mostly because care duties and caring for the children tends to, on average, fall more to the women in a partnership. And the fact that those plans are more often asked for by women actually kind of brings us back to your earlier concern about stigma, that does this present sort of a stigma? And I think it doesn't necessarily have to. That if I say I'm going to be out early to go run a marathon, that's one thing. But somehow that if it's somebody picking up care duties, that's seen as a concern. And this wasn't the focus in our research, but certainly other research has talked about this expectation of availability and being available to your coworkers and your boss, and the concern that you're not maybe an engaged enough employee because you have this different schedule that you're not answering that email. And I think that this isn't just a problem for flexible working. This is like modern work life, right? So I have a colleague that emails me regularly on Sunday morning. I see it. I don't answer it. But then one of our other colleagues does answer that email. And so it's that balance that we have to strike with the boundaries of home and life that has to be thought about. And I think this is also why one policy solution to flexible working is to really focus on how it can be used and made available to everybody. That if it's just something that women with children take, or you just take if you're sick, then that's not necessarily going to be seen as a positive by employees in the workplace. Whereas if we can put forward many scenarios that include things that you're choosing, family obligations, all sorts of areas of life that allow us to be flexible and that there's a higher uptake, then that's going to have a much more positive impression for people.
That is difficult, of course, because it's not just giving people permission to do it. It's actually encouraging it and trying to foster an environment in which you have a real mix of when people are around, so you can cover as much time as you can, but give people flexibility.
Indeed. That's exactly it. And one frontline solution is that you require managers to alter their schedule or take advantage.
I wondered when we would get to that, because there's a difference between, talking the talk and walking the walk, isn't there?
There sure is. So if managers, I think, and that goes back to the example I gave you of the woman who had flexed her time, and in other departments that would be fine, but her manager was less comfortable with that arrangement. I think sometimes people have to experience for themselves that this can work, that people can be productive, that maybe you don't have to micromanage people, that can be a good solution. So it's actually, I think, a management skill to think about better metrics than simply watching to see if people are in the office.
And for employees, Ed, who are thinking about saying they're in a place where this is okay, it's in the policy, it's supposed to be allowed. If you're thinking of approaching your manager and saying, "Look, it would suit me to work 4 longer days rather than 5 less long days," how should they think about having that conversation?
I would not assume that just because it's a policy that's written down somewhere that it will be immediately supported. I mean, everything we've talked about so far is that, a written policy is one thing, implementing it, having the culture to support it, having your manager behind you is an entirely other thing. So I would approach it just about anything else. It's a negotiation. You want to make a good, solid business case for it. You want to look at it from your supervisor's point of view. What are his or her concerns? How would you ameliorate those in terms of if you were out of the office all of a sudden every Tuesday for the next 5 months, what would that look like? What kind of impact would that have on the organization, your department, your teammates, et cetera? I mean, you want to kind of act as a manager in that sense. You want to look at it from that point of view. And if you can make a solid business case that nothing would fall apart, in the worst case, or even possibly contribute to everything, that's an even stronger business case for it. That's how I would approach it. Negotiation with some solid rationale behind it can never hurt anybody.
And Erica, for organisations that are maybe thinking about doing this, what boxes should they check before they embark on it?
The number one thing that has to be there is really trust, that you have to trust your employees, and that tends to go along with a healthy workplace culture and good management practices, good HR policy, and good staff. So if you maybe need to up your management game, maybe that's the first priority before you embark on flexible working. But it is really a nice thing for employers to think about, because if things are so overstretched that you can't have flexibility, this is also a sign perhaps that you might also have higher organizational stress, that you might not have the slack capacity that would let people take sick days and the leave and then maybe the training days that they really should be having to keep the workforce happy and healthy and up to date. So those are all some things I would think about.
Thank you both of you for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Erica Kosler is a lecturer in management at the University of Melbourne, and Ed Hyatt's a PhD student. He's at Melbourne as well. On RN, the ABC Listen app, wherever you get your podcasts, this is Best Practice. I'm Richard Adey.